Hello, fight fans. Welcome to Noctigal Productions. Today is Saturday, August 28th, the day of UFC Vegas 35, of which the main event is Edson Barboza versus Chikadze. On this card as well is Kevin Lee versus Daniel Rodriguez. And these are the two fights that I wanted to take a closer look at and try to give some of my thoughts and possible predictions on the outcome of each of these fights. To begin, I wanted to start with Kevin Lee versus Daniel Rodriguez, as their fight will take place prior to the headliner. Now, when it comes to breaking down the predictions that I give, what I like to do is look at the most previous fight, the most recent fight from each fighter, as I typically believe that your most recent fight will show what level you are at currently, at least somewhat. It's not always going to be the most accurate representation of a fighter. However, I do generally believe that a fighter's most recent outing in the octagon is going to be the most telling when it comes to skill, power, and stamina. And with that in mind, let's get into Kevin Lee versus Daniel Rodriguez. And so looking at Kevin Lee first, as he's the favorite to win, the betting odds at the time of recording this video are minus 145 for Kevin Lee and plus 125 for Daniel Rodriguez. And if you don't know much about betting odds, that essentially means that Kevin Lee is the betting favorite, Daniel Rodriguez is the underdog. Now, with that being said, they're both somehow technically ranked number 11 on the UFC website when you go to the event for tonight. And so that sets up an interesting situation in which either one of these guys here could technically get the win just based off of their rankings on paper. So Kevin Lee's most recent fight was actually against the current lightweight champion, Charles Oliveira, as Kevin Lee typically used to fight down at lightweight. However, since his loss to Charles Oliveira, he has decided to move up to welterweight, and he wants to essentially take over this division. And that's actually something that I wanted to make a note of, is the fact that Kevin Lee is overly confident. A great channel called Mipe Sports did a video about this recently, about Kevin Lee's confidence. And it's very interesting because it's a double-edged sword when it comes to Kevin Lee, because Kevin Lee's confidence is something that really can work out well for him. And I think that sometimes he gets in his opponent's heads and it really works out for him because he's so confident once he gets into the ring with them. However, I also think the issue with that confidence is that sometimes he looks past opponents and doesn't actually see the dangers that they may actually pose to him. Furthermore, it also translates into complacency at times, as the confidence that he may display outside of the ring may not go away once he's in there and fighting, and if that confidence level never wanes even the slightest, he might be too willing to take risks that will end up costing him the fight, which is what's happened many times when it comes to Tony Ferguson or even the Charles Oliveira fight, as Kevin Lee took down Oliveira several times, but that was such a gamble against someone like Oliveira, who is just an incredible jiu-jitsu artist. I understand that Kevin Lee is a good wrestler, and Kevin Lee wanted to demonstrate his wrestling skills. However, when you were going up against someone who has the most submission wins in UFC history, I felt as though the confidence level for him was too high on the ground, especially considering that Oliveira almost submitted him several times within the first round, and the entire fight was Oliveira attempting to submit Kevin Lee. So it was very odd to me that he was so confident in taking down Oliveira and trying to fight him on the ground, because that ended up not going well for him. He ended up being caught by Oliveira and getting put into a choke, and he tapped. And then he was a sore loser about it, and that's another thing too, is that he doesn't really learn from his mistakes, it seems like. He is very upset anytime he loses anything. And it's okay to be upset, but you need to be able to learn from those mistakes, and you need to be able to humble yourself a little bit. And I think that Kevin Lee has an issue with that, and I think that's part of the reason that he's gone up to welterweight, is he wanted to add on this muscle and be able to bully people around because he's so confident of his ability, and he's always seen himself as a UFC champion. However, in his last fight against Charles Oliveira, I don't know if I really saw that, other than the fact that he does have, decent submission defense and ground game overall, and he does have considerable amount of power, yet he's susceptible to a lot of mistakes and holes in his game, and I think that's something that Rodriguez is very much so going to capitalize upon. I went back and watched the fight between Daniel Rodriguez and Preston Parsons, and it was definitely a very interesting fight because Rodriguez was able to take him out very quickly within the first round And honestly, I think a lot of it was due to the leg kicks. And I think that's going to be a big component of this Kevin Lee and Rodriguez fight, is who's landing the leg kicks. Because Rodriguez has some heavy leg kicks. When I was watching him fight Preston Parsons, I was just astounded every time he kicked his leg and that Parsons stayed remaining on his feet, because the thud of Rodriguez's kicks were just incredible. It was like a Barboza kick, not in the speed, but in the power. That smack when it landed, it was insane. I was very impressed by the power of the kicks on Rodriguez. And he actually has really good takedown defense, too. Parsons tried to take him down a couple times in that round, and he denied it every time. So that does also possibly provide hope for Rodriguez to defend against any takedowns that Kevin Lee may try to throw against him. However, with that being said, he was able to get Charles Oliveira on the ground. So, with that in mind, Kevin Lee could still possibly out-wrestle and out-grapple Rodriguez, but I just don't know if we've seen enough of Rodriguez's ground game to actually know. What may end up working in the favor of Rodriguez over Kevin Lee is the fact that Rodriguez is very stoic, calm, and patient, whether it's in or outside of the cage. He is the same man in and outside the cage, and in a lot of ways Kevin Lee is as well. However, Kevin Lee is much more emotional and short-tempered, whereas Rodriguez is not. And this bodes incredibly well for Rodriguez, especially considering that he has pretty good boxing movement, and movement for someone who doesn't look in as good of shape as, say, someone like Kevin Lee. However, I think that with the boxing movement and just the general movement that he actually has, and the way that he headhunts, and the fact that he's so calm and patient, I think that if it makes it past the first or second round, I really don't see how the decision is going to end up going to Kevin Lee. I just don't know if he has enough in him at this point, because I think that the only thing that's going to really work for him against someone like Rodriguez is going to be that ground game, and we have yet to see how that ground game is going to work on Rodriguez, and I feel like he's going to neutralize it pretty well, and I could be wrong, but I'm putting my money on Daniel Rodriguez versus Kevin Lee. My money's all going on Daniel Rodriguez. I think that he's got this one in the bag. I'm just not sure if Kevin Lee can come back and, get an upset like this. Even though it would not be considered an upset on betting odds, I'm not sure how many people actually think that Kevin Lee is going to win this fight. I certainly don't think he is. Next up, we've got to talk about the main event of the evening. Number 9 ranked Edson Barboza versus number 10 ranked Giga Chikadze in the welterweight division. Just kidding, it's in the featherweight division. Kevin Lee versus Daniel Rodriguez is in the welterweight division. Anyway, Edson Barboza, betting odds on him right now is minus 125 and plus 105 for Giga Chikadze, which means, Chikadze is an underdog, but not a massive underdog. And that's actually something that I wanted to talk about, is that I'm just going to throw this out there right now. I think Chikadze could have this in the bag. I think that Chikadze could take this from Barboza. Barboza is an incredible fighter, and I'm not going to take anything away from Barboza. However, I do think that Chikadze has a few advantages over him. Not only is he younger than Barboza, but he's also very similar to Barboza, and he's taller and longer than Barboza. And I think that that's going to be a huge advantage, because very similar to Barboza, Chikadze has insane leg kicks, and just kicks in general. His kicks are incredibly fast and powerful. I don't, however, think that his kicks are as fast as Barboza's. There's no denying that Barboza will likely be the faster of the two fighters when the time comes for them to fight in that cage. However, I also am wondering to see who is going to push the pace of the fight, because I have noticed from the past fight with Shane Burgos with Barboza is that Barboza is very willing to back up and let his opponent control the pace of the fight at times. And not only does that not look good to judges, that doesn't always look good to fans and everyone else on looking. And with that in mind, if it were to fight to come down to decision, unless Barboza is the one pushing the action, I really think that Chikadze is going to get the decision win in that regard. But honestly, I can see how it's a toss-up in a lot of other people's eyes, because these guys are just insane, because they they both will punch and kick simultaneously. They're both very fast, and they both prefer to stand and bang. So we know that this is most likely going to be a firefight. They are just going to be slamming each other with kicks all night long, most likely. They're just going to be pummeling each other's faces and bodies with jabs and kicks. I mean, it's just going to be ridiculous. What's interesting, though, to me is that Chikadze was the one who pushed the action in his fight versus Cub Swanson, and he took out someone, like Cub Swanson, who is a veteran of the sport and by no means an awful fighter. Chikadze took Cub Swanson out with relative ease. It was almost nothing for him. He has great movement, speed, and power, especially for someone who's 6 feet tall, weighing in at 145 pounds. I mean, you look at the side, like how the musculature of Barboza versus Chikadze, it would look like Barboza would be the winner based on like physique. However, you have to consider the fact that Barboza is not quite as tall as Chikadze, and that's going to be a huge advantage when it comes to the striking. And as I've said before, I noticed that in his previous fight, Barboza let his opponent Burgos control the pace and the action of the fight, and that can be concerning for someone for me when I'm trying to make a prediction for these fights, because it doesn't always mean that the person who is pushing the action is going to be the winner. However, oftentimes the one who is pushing the action is likely the one that is going to be seen in a better light from the judges and perhaps the commentators because of their movement. Whereas Barboza, even if he's landing the better shots, it can be a little underwhelming to watch him moving backwards the whole time. So hopefully they'll both just be moving forward at each other, staying in the pocket, and just banging it out all night long. And if that is the case, who knows? Maybe Barboza could take it, because Barboza does vary his combos really, really well, and I could see that being something that ends up being a problem for Chikadze. However, I also think that the youth and the physical advantages of Chikadze and the fact that he fights so similarly to Barboza gives him the advantage in the end. And while it may not be favorable for me to say that both Kevin Lee and Edson Barboza are going to lose tonight, I feel like it's a night for upsets. So, we're going to see how correct I am this time, considering I was technically incorrect about the Corey Sandhagen-TJ Dillashaw fight, despite the fact that I think most people know that Corey Sandhagen actually won that fight. But anyways, yeah, guys, if you got any thoughts on who's going to win the fights tonight, got any other questions or comments, leave them down in the comments below. Like and subscribe. I appreciate you. Everything helps out a lot, and I'll see you guys next time in my next fight prediction. Peace out.